but I need a nuclear reaction to generate the 1.21 gigawatts of electricity.
1.21 gigawatts!
Back to the Future changed everything we believed about time travel. It rewrote science, gave us the DeLorean, and sent a young man on a journey that changed the future forever. These are 15 weird facts you didn't know about Back to the Future. As a bonus, guess where Bob Gale got the idea? So, sit back and let's rewind time. Number 1. Let's face it, the DeLorean is the most iconic part of the film. Even John DeLorean himself was grateful that his car was used in the movie, writing a letter to Robert Zemeckis in which he thanks the director for using the car. But this was never the intended prop for time travel. In the original script, the flux capacitor, powered by Coca-Cola, didn't even exist, and it was suggested that a refrigerator, with a device called a power converter, be used. But this would have required many more steps to make the time travel scene even slightly believable, and they simply stuck to the classic DeLorean. And much like the main prop of the show, you won't believe what Disney had to say about it. Number 2. When Zemeckis and Gale got approval from Columbia to write a screenplay, they wrote something incredible. Yet, none of the studios felt the same, with Columbia first calling it too sweet. Then they approached Universal Studios, which was even worse, saying that time travel movies don't make any money. So they approached the one company known for heartwarming and often wildly fictional movies, Disney. Now, you'd think Disney would jump at such a screenplay, but they called it too incestuous because of the mother falling for her son. In fact, it was rejected 44 times by various studios, until they did one thing. Number 3. While every studio was rejecting the movie, Zemeckis and Gale turned toward one of their close friends, a man named Steven Spielberg. At first, he too was a little scared to touch it, but after reading the script, Spielberg responded by saying that it was a very unusual story, but based on old-fashioned principles like family and coming of age and dreams and desires and the generation gap. He proposed that his own production company, Amblin Entertainment, make the film. But Zemeckis and Gale rejected the idea, not wanting to be known as the people who relied on their friend to get work done in Hollywood. They finally came around, and the next problem was finding a main actor. Number 4. Robert Zemeckis wanted Michael J. Fox as his main star from day one, but this almost didn't happen. Back in the 80s, Fox was tied up with a sitcom called Family Ties, and its production company, NBC, was not willing to release him for casting in Back to the Future. So, they had to settle for whoever they could find, with big names like Johnny Depp, Charlie Sheen, and even John Cusack taking the auditions. Eric Stoltz was the man who eventually got the part, and he was cast as Marty McFly. Yet, Stoltz couldn't really deliver the laughs the way the director intended, and 6 weeks into production, he was fired. So, Fox got the part, but working 2 jobs proved extremely difficult. Number 5. When Stoltz left, Fox was once again offered the part, but NBC and showrunner Gary Goldberg didn't believe he could do 2 things at the same time. Fox begged Goldberg to let him make the movie, but had one very important condition. The Family Ties schedule was not to be interrupted for anything. This meant that he had to work on the set of Family Ties from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. before rushing to the set of Back to the Future, where he'd film until 3:30 a.m. For 2 months, he kept up this grueling schedule to ensure that both productions were at their very best. It certainly paid off, especially the awards won by Back to the Future. Number 6. Back to the Future does an incredible job at foreshadowing what is to come. However, one of the best moments happens immediately at the start when the camera pans to a man hanging on the arm of a clock. It not only depicts a scene from the 1923 silent-era comedy Safety Last, but also what later happened to Doc when he found himself hanging from a real clock tower. It was basically poetry in motion. But, speaking of impressive, what about the iconic moment the DeLorean travels back in time? Number 7. One of the biggest challenges faced by Spielberg and company was creating a scene about going into the past that felt realistic. Industrial Light and Magic, ILM, was tasked with coming up with the effect, and they pulled it off brilliantly. They first laid out the tracks and lit them with gasoline, before a stunt driver drove the DeLorean that was superimposed on the burning tracks. Lightning and other effects were added, with a camera attached to a dolly coming to a standstill when the DeLorean vanished. This was a masterpiece in creativity and production. and more akin to something you'd expect to see in modern movies. The scene became one of the most iconic and arguably the best scene for many people when looking back. Number 8. Back in the 80s and early 90s, fans really lived themselves into the story, often believing that the bad guy was bad in real life as well. This became so rough for Thomas F. Wilson, who played the bully Biff Tannen, that he was constantly asked the same question at every presser. Wilson became annoyed, and he even created his own script to answer these questions. It went something like this. Yes, I'm Tom Wilson. Yes, Biff from Back to the Future. Michael J. Fox is nice. No, I'm not in close contact with him. Christopher Lloyd is nice. Leah Thompson is nice. Crispin Glover is unusual, but not as unusual as he sometimes presents himself. Eric Stoltz originally played Marty, but was fired due to performance issues. We had a couple of personal issues, but it's all fine now. It was a recurring gag at every Q&A session the antagonist had to be at. Many fans still see him as the bully and a horrible human. Number 9. If there is one thing the director nailed, it was the soundtrack of Back to the Future. In fact, it has one of the most powerful soundtrack collections of all time, led by The Power of Love. At the time, the song was number 1 in many different countries. But what many missed was that Lewis himself was in the movie. Yes, the man cutting the band short during their audition is the man who actually wrote the song. Quite a nice touch to add him to the cast. But you wouldn't guess the name the studio wanted to call it. Number 10. The title of the movie is just as iconic from the film itself. Yet, this was never the name the studio wanted for it. They argued the title was too bland and didn't really have enough to inspire people to watch it. In fact, the studio originally wanted to call it Spaceman from Pluto, suggesting it was catchier and more people would come to watch it. But it had nothing to do with the plot of the movie, and since the director didn't want to get involved, Steven Spielberg himself stepped up and said that it would be titled Back to the Future. This was perhaps one of the moves that turned it into an overnight classic. But where did Bob Gale get the idea? Number 11. For years, Bob Gale wanted to create a time travel film, but getting a good plot was something he always struggled with. Nothing really seemed to fit what he was looking to achieve. Then one summer, he visited his parents' home, where he stumbled upon an old high school yearbook of his dad. After seeing the old pictures, Bob asked himself if he and his dad would have been friends if they were teenagers at the same time. Immediately, the idea struck him of a father and son meeting at the same age, which perfectly builds the plot of the film. But isn't it still kind of weird that Disney couldn't pick up on this humor? Number 12. When you look at the setting of the movie, Hill Valley, it might be easy to think that this was a small American town used for the film. But that is actually not the case. In fact, it wasn't even built specifically for the movie. Located in the backyard of Universal Studios, it features the famous clock tower in Town Square. Yet it was built in 1948 for the filming of To Kill a Mockingbird, Gremlins, and Goosebumps 2. Perhaps this is why it gave many people some déjà vu. But if you have seen it in any other movie, be sure to let me know in the comments below. Number 13. Doc Brown was not the first person to travel back in time. It was his dog, Einstein. But Einstein almost didn't make it to the movie, with the first script revealing Doc Brown to have a pet chimp called Shem. Yet, Sidney Sheinberg once again felt that having a chimpanzee in the movie wouldn't do well, and this time, everyone listened. His decision to change the name to something ridiculous might have been a good idea, but at least this made it even better. Number 14. The man known as George McFly, Crispin Glover, was one of the star actors. He drove the storyline and played a crucial role in how Marty would develop as a character. Yet, he didn't like the ending, preferring it to have been different and more in line with what he had originally read in the script. So, when the sequels came up, Glover insisted that he had to be paid more if they needed him to return. But this wasn't something the director or the studio was willing to do. They simply left him out, using old, archived footage of Marty's dad where he should have portrayed his role. Glover didn't let this slide, suing the studio for using his likeness, and the case later resulted in a landmark ruling that changed the way character likenesses were used. Number 15.
Who's president of the United States in 1985?
Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan, the actor?
Once Marty finally meets a young Doc Brown, he needs to convince him that he is really from the future. In one of the scenes, Marty is asked who the president was in 1985, to which he responds, Ronald Reagan. Yet, Robert Zemeckis feared using the name of Reagan, but once the president saw it, he absolutely loved the film. In fact, Reagan even quoted Back to the Future in his 1986 State of the Union address.
Never has there been a more exciting time to be alive. A time of rousing wonder and heroic achievement. As they said in the film Back to the Future, where we're going, we don't need roads.
When President Reagan first saw the film in the theater, it was reported that he ordered the projectionist to stop and rewind that specific scene. Perhaps it was his days being an actor that kicked in. But Back to the Future wasn't the only legendary movie made in 1985. While this was being produced, a few kids were having a lot of fun creating the cultural classic, The Breakfast Club. Check out this video next to find out why.